Hello, loves. Tonight we're pulling out the Geneva Convention. This is Article 1, Geneva Convention, for the amelioration of the condition of the wounded and sick in the armed forces in the field of August 12, 1949. Chapter 1, Article 1. The high contracting parties undertake to respect and ensure the respect for the present convention in all circumstances. Article 2. In addition to the provisions which shall be implemented in peacetime, the present convention shall apply to all cases of declared war or any other armed conflict which may arise between two or more of the high contracting parties, even if the state of war is not recognized by one of them. The Convention shall also apply to all cases of partial or total occupation of the territory of a high contracting party, even if the said occupation meets with no armed resistance. Although one of the powers in the conflict may not be a party to the present convention, the powers who are parties thereto shall remain bound by it in their mutual relations. They shall furthermore be bound by the convention in relation to the power, if the latter accepts and applies the provisions thereof. 3. In the case of armed conflict, not of international character, occurring in the territory of one of the high contracting parties, each party to the conflict shall be bound to apply as a minimum the following provisions. 1. Persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including members of armed forces who have laid down their arms and those placed hors de combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or other causes, shall in all circumstances be treated humanely, without any adverse distinction founded on race, color, religion, or faith, sex, birth, or wealth, or any other similar criteria. To this end, the following acts are and shall remain prohibited at any time, in any place whatsoever, with respect to the above-mentioned persons. Violence to life and person, in particular, murder of all kinds, mutilation, cruel treatment, and torture. B. Taking of hostages. C. Outrages upon personal dignity, in particular, humiliating and degrading treatment. D. Passing sentences and the carrying out of executions without previous judgment pronounced by a regularly constituted court, affording all judicial guarantees which are recognized as indispensable by civilized people. 2. The wounded and sick shall be collected and cared for. An impartial humanitarian body, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, may offer its services to the parties of the conflict. The parties to the conflict should further endeavor to bring into force by any means of special agreements or all or part of the other provisions of the present convention. The application of the preceding provisions shall not affect the legal status of the parties to the conflict. 4. Neutral powers shall apply, by analogy, the provisions of the present convention to the wounded and sick, and to the members of the medical personnel, and to the chaplains of the armed forces of the parties to the conflict received or interned in their territory, as well as to dead persons found. Article 5. For the protections of persons who have fallen into the hands of the enemy, the present convention shall apply until their final repatriation. Article 6. In addition to the agreements expressly provided for In Articles 10, 15, 23, 28, 31, 36, 37, and 52, the high contracting parties may conclude other special arrangement for all matters concerning which they may deem it suitable to make separate provisions. No special agreement shall adversely affect the situation of the wounded and sick, of members of the medical personnel or of chaplains, as defined by the present convention, nor restrict the rights which it confers upon them. Wounded and sick, as well as medical personnel and chaplains, shall continue to have the benefit of such agreements as long as the convention is applicable to them, except where express provisions to the contrary are contained in the aforesaid or subsequent agreements, or where more favorable measures have been taken with regard to them by one or the other parties to the conflict. Article 7. Wounded and sick, as well as members of medical personnel and chaplains, may in no circumstances renounce in part or in entirety the rights secured to them by the present convention and by special agreements referred to in the foregoing article, if such there be. 8. The present convention shall be applied with the cooperation and under the scrutiny of the protecting powers, whose duty it is to safeguard the interests of the parties to the conflict. For this purpose, the protecting powers may appoint, apart from their own diplomatic or consular staff, delegates from amongst their own nationals or the nationals of other neutral powers. The said delegates shall be subject to the approval of the power with which they are to carry out their duties. The parties to the conflict shall facilitate to the greatest extent possible the task of representatives or delegates of the protecting powers. The representatives or delegates of the protecting powers shall not in any case exceed their mission under the present convention. They shall, in particular, take account of the imperative necessities of the security of state wherein they carry out their duties. Their activities shall only be restricted as an exceptional and temporary measure when this is rendered necessary by imperative military necessities. Article 9. The provisions of the present convention constitute no obstacle to the humanitarian activities which the International Committee of the Red Cross or any other impartial humanitarian organization may subject to the consent of the parties to the conflict concerned undertake for the protection of the wounded and sick, medical personnel, and chaplains, and for their relief. Article 10. The high contracting parties may at any time agree to entrust to an organization which offers all guarantees of impartiality and efficacy the duties incumbent on the protecting powers by virtue of the present convention. When wounded, sick, or medical personnel and chaplains do not benefit or cease to benefit, no matter for what reason, by the activities of a protecting power or of an organization provided for in the first paragraph, detaining power shall request a neutral state or such organization to undertake the functions performed under the present convention by a protecting power designated by the parties to a conflict. If a protection cannot be arranged accordingly, the detaining power shall request or shall accept, subject to the provisions of this article, the offer of the services of humanitarian organizations such as the International Committee of the Red Cross to assume the humanitarian functions performed by the protecting powers under the present convention. Any neutral power or any organization invited by the power concerned or offering itself to these purposes shall be required to act with a sense of responsibility towards towards the party to the conflict on which persons protected by the present convention depend, and shall be required to furnish sufficient assurances that it is in a position to undertake the appropriate function and to discharge them impartially. No degradation from the preceding provisions shall be made by special agreement between powers, one of which is restricted. No degradation from the preceding provisions shall be made by special arrangements between powers, one of which is restricted, even temporarily, in its freedom to negotiate with the other power or its allies by reason of military events, more particularly where the whole of the substantial part of the territory of the said power is occupied. Whenever the present convention mention is made of a protecting power, such mention also applies to substitute organization in the sense of the present article. Article 11. In cases where they deem it advisable in the interest of the protected persons, particularly in cases of disagreement between the parties to the conflict as to the application or interpretation of the provisions of the present convention, the protecting powers shall lend their good offices with a view to settle the disagreement. For this purpose, each of the protecting powers may either at the invitation of one party or on its own initiative propose to the parties to the conflict a meeting of their representatives, in particular of the authorities responsible for the wounded and sick, members of medical personnel and chaplains, possibly on neutral territory suitably chosen. The parties to the conflict shall be bound to give effect to the proposals made to them for this purpose. The protecting powers may, if necessary, propose for approval by the parties to the conflict a person belonging to a neutral power or delegated by the International Committee of the Red Cross, who shall be invited to take part in such a meeting. That concludes Chapter 1 of the First Geneva Convention. This would be for the amelioration of the conditions of the wounded and sick in the armed forces in the field of 12 August 1949. And I hope I'm pronouncing amelioration properly. I will be reading you Chapter 2 as soon as possible, but it's getting late, so bye. Love you all, and be well.